Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing Simchat Le'olam, Kol HaYiladim now. Simcha to the dagim in the deep blue sea. Simcha to you and me.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we bring some joy to the world by talking about prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, and many more.
Hey, what happened to the opening from Shmini Atzeret? You know, joy is our mission and prophets are our method.
Rick, I'm glad you remembered, and also that you reminded our viewers. So that's what happened in the opening. You gave it. I'll just take a moment to add that I'm Larry Herman, sipping some very fine wine and talking Haftarah, as I do most weeks, with my very good chaver, Rick Muller. How are you doing today, Rick?
Well, I'm kind of hoping that we'll start getting some Noah-like rain. We could really use it here in Southern California.
Well, that might be a bit much, but it would be nice to get a stretch of drenching rain. But I'm glad that you mentioned Noah, or the waters of Noah, because that's the connection between the Parsha and the Haftarah that the sages used to select this week's reading from Isaiah.
Uh-oh, here it comes.
Come on, Rick. You've got your theories of trope, and I've got my ideas about the connection between the Haftarah and the Parsha. But this one was easy.
Well, all you had to do was look in the Eitz Chaim Chumash commentary. They always give the connection there.
True, but they don't always give the explanation that I come up with.
Very true. So let's hear it.
Well, first of all, if you look through all the books of the prophets, you'll find only a handful of references to Noah in Joshua, Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Zechariah. And if you look for references to floods, you'll only find them in Isaiah and one in Jeremiah. But only in chapter 54 of Isaiah do we find the double reference to both Noah and to a flood.
Or actually to Noah, which appears twice in verse 9, and which I guess can be translated as a flood.
Exactly, Rick. And that's it. As I've said many times, the sages didn't need a very big hook on which to hang the connecting rod between the Parsha and Haftarah. But in this case, I think they did a really great job.
For once you're being complimentary. I like that.
And I like that you like that. But you might not like this. The sages were also being lazy.
Hold on there. You can't insult the sages like that. Those guys worked hard. Most of them held down day jobs in addition to their saging gigs. You say that you think they did a great job, and then you say they're lazy. What's going on?
Rick, I'm going to explain it all. First of all, notice that this is one of those Haftarahs where the Ashkenazim read more than the Sephardim.
What's the big deal? Happens all the time.
By my count, it happens 11 times, including 3 of the first 4 Haftarot of the year, including this one. I guess that the Sephardim are more anxious to get the Kiddush than us Ashkenazim. So this week, we all read Isaiah chapter 54, verses 1 through 10. And then we Ashkenazim go on and read 7 more verses in chapter 54, and then the first 5 verses from chapter 55, more than doubling the Sephardim reading in terms of verses.
Like you said, not in such a hurry to get to Kiddush, I guess.
Yeah, but Rick, we already read chapter 54, verses 1 through 10 as the Haftarah for Ki Teitzei. And we also read the Ashkenazi edition as the entire Haftarah for Re'eh.
Ah, I get you. You think that they're being lazy for not finding a different text for Noah.
Or perhaps for Ki Teitzei, since they actually really like the connection using Noah. But before I explain just why I like it so much, I want to remind our viewers of a couple of things that we already discussed when we did those episodes for Ki Teitzei and Re'eh. First, we have another source for some of the poetry in the Kabbalat Shabbat song, Lecha Dodi. In verse 3, we have, Ki yamin u'smol tifrotzi, and then in verse 4, we have, Lo tevoshi ve'al tikalmi. Both of those show up in Lecha Dodi.
I guess Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz, who composed Lecha Dodi, really knew and liked his Isaiah.
Not only did he like Isaiah, but he also liked the forlorn and then comforted wife metaphor that Isaiah and other prophets used for Jerusalem and for the people. And from the Re'eh episode, I want to note that one of my all-time favorite verses, verse 13. V'chol banayich limudei Adonai v'rav shalom banayich. And all your children shall be disciples of Adonai, and great shall be the happiness of your children, or alternatively, the happiness of your builders. This verse is recited in many shuls as the Torah learning that we do prior to reciting the Kaddish Rabbanan that starts, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Talmidei Chochamim Marbim. This is one of my very favorite passages, and it appears on the parochet, or the art cover, of the Chonen Dalim synagogue in Maputo in honor of Diane and me, but in Portuguese.
In Mozambique, right?
Right.
That's great. But Mr. Talmid Chacham, what's all this got to do with the great job you think that the sages did here, even if they duplicated the Haftarah?
What they did was to draw a wonderful contrast between the promise made to Noah after the flood and the promise that Isaiah is relating to here, which applies very specifically to the Jewish people. In the Noah story, we read this week, God is angry with his creation and decides to destroy the entire world. But he provides an escape route in the form of Noah and the ark. Once Noah and the remnants of creation are safe, God makes a covenant with all of creation never to destroy the earth again.
A cynic might say that man has taken over the job of destroying the world by himself.
A cynic might say that, but I know that you are not a cynic, Rick, so you're not saying that.
No. You're right about that, but we do need to do a better job.
Rick, exactly. The deal with Noah and the other creatures actually involved no commitment on their part. In fact, it's pretty clear that after having been saved from the flood, Noah gets drunk. Not exactly what a tzaddik would do, is it? But Isaiah contrasts that brit to the covenant that he's made with the Jewish people. It's also a covenant for all of eternity, but it's also a covenant that demands something of us. And that something is that we observe the mitzvot.
And how do we know that?
By the verse that I love so much. And all your children shall be disciples of Adonai, and great shall be the happiness of your builders. The next verse continues, you shall be established through righteousness.
Okay, but what happens when we forget?
Then God forgives and takes us back in love, just like in the metaphor of the forlorn wife. The brit is not broken. We just need to figure out how to do a better job.
I like that reading. And how about if I do some reading, as in chanting the Haftarah?
Let's do it. Rick, let's start with the first 10 chapters of 54, and then we'll turn to the last 7 verses of that chapter, and then we'll conclude with the first 5 verses of chapter 55. Since we covered all of this in some detail in our episodes for Ki Teitzei and Re'eh, I suggest that we only focus on a few of the trope highlights in each section. Viewers who are interested can view those episodes on YouTube by searching for Haftarah Plethora Ki Teitzei and Haftarah Plethora Re'eh.
Making our viewers work a little bit, kind of like our own little covenant, huh? But I'm good with that. So in the first section, I want to focus on the 4 Dargat Tavir combos in verses 1, 2, and 6. We start off with Ki Rabim B'nei Shomei Ma, which means many will be the children of the forlorn wife. Then in verse 2, Viriot Mishkenotai, which refers to curtains of her dwelling, followed by Ki Chesha Azuva, and then Ve'eshet Nurim, both in verse 6. A lot of drama there. The first is explicitly referring to the abandoned wife, and the second infers that the wife was abandoned when she was young. So I think that the Dargat Tavirs there are something of a leitmotif for the metaphor of the forlorn wife. The falling pattern of the trope introduce a note of emotion, highs and lows. The Darga and the Tavir are like a point counterpoint, wife forsaken, then taken back.
Excellent. Leitmotif, kind of like in the opera. Let's get to the chanting, which you can follow in the Eitz Chaim Chumash on page 65, or on the screen with Storm and Norman's graphically enhanced text. I wonder if he'll have a water theme for us this week. But Rick, start off with the bracha, please.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Roni akara lo yalanda pitchi rina v'tzahali lo chala kirabim b'nei shomema mibnei ve'ula amar Adonai archivi mekom oholech viriot mishkenotayich yatu al tachsochi ha'arichi metarayich vitedotayich chazeki ki yamin usmol tifrotzi vezarech goyim yirash ve'arim neshamot yoshivu al tir'i kilo tevoshi ve'al tikalmi kilo tachbiri ki voshet alumayich tishkachi vecherpat almanutayich lo tizkari od ki vo alayich osayich Adonai tzvaot shemo v'goalech kedosh Yisrael Elohei chol haaretz yikareh ki chisha azuva va'atzuvat ruach kra'ach Adonai ve'eshet neurim ki tima'es amar Elohayich berega katon azavtich uvrachamim gedolim akabtzech beshetzef ketzef istarti fanarega mimech uvechesed olam richamtich amar goalech Adonai ki menoach zot li asher nishpati me'avor menoach od al haaretz ken nishpati miktsof alayich umik orbach ki heharim yamushu vehagvaot tmutena vechasdi meitech lo yamush uvrit shlomi lo tamut amar merachamech Adonai.
Rick, what gems do you have for us in the next section?
Oh, that's rich. Gems. Like you didn't know that the section starts off with a list of precious gemstones. So puch may be turquoise, and sapirim are sapphires, kadchod are rubies, and then avnei ekdach and avnei chefetz are some kinds of precious stones. We've already dealt with the bonayich wordplay, so let me comment on a couple of hine anochis. The first appears in verse 11 with a kadma v'azla. The translation doesn't do it justice. The speaker is presumably God, since verse 10 ends with Amar merachamech Adonai, says God, your comforter. Verse 11 begins by addressing the unhappy, storm-tossed, uncomforted one, and then continues very dramatically with the hine anochi, as in, it is I, the I being God, who will lay the foundations.
Maybe a little in the vein of, here I am to save the day.
Okay, Mighty Mouse, let's not get overly dramatic or cartoonish, but contrast that hine anochi with the one in verse 16, where the hine is actually a written correction for hein with a calmer mapach pashta family of tropes. It still has the sense of it is I, but not as dramatic. And then in the final verse of the chapter, we have the only pazer, the rarest trope, but once again on that smallest and seemingly insignificant word, zot. Zot. Once again, the JPS translation doesn't do it justice. I prefer the altered translation of this is the estate of Adonai's servants. But what is this? It's the entirety of the previous 6.5 verses. Precious gems, far from oppression, no one to frighten you anymore, protected from weapons of violence and words. That's a lot of stuff to stuff into a simple zot.
It sure is, Rick. Please chant the remainder of chapter 54.
Aniya soara lo nuchama hine anochi marbitz bapuch avanayich visatich basapirim v'samti kadchod shimshotayich usharayich leavne ekdach v'chol gvulech leavne chefetz v'chol banayich limudei Adonai v'rav shlom banayich b'tzdaka tikonani rachaki me'oshek ki lo tirai umimchita ki lo tikrav elayich hein gor yagur efes meoti migar itach alayich yipol hine anochi barati charash nofeach be'esh pecham umotzi chli lemaasehu ve'anochi barati mashchit lechabel kol kli yutzar alayich lo yitzlach v'chol lashon takumitach lamishpat tarshi zot nachalat avdei Adonai b'tzidkatam me'iti neum Adonai.
Very nice. Rick, we come to the end of the Haftarah, which are the first 5 verses of chapter 55. What have you got?
Well, I hate to disappoint you, old buddy, but trope-wise, it's just a snoozer. But sometimes that's for an effect. It lets the text speak for itself. The one trope that stands out is a lonesome tavir in the first verse on below chesef, which means without money. After the flood, no one has any money, but you don't need money for water or food. Then there's another tavir in verse 4 on hein, which gets untranslated in the JPS.
Right, but in the alter translation, it's a form of hine, which he translates as look, an interjection.
Right, look, what you need is a leader, in this case, David. I think that the sages wanted to extend the Haftarah into chapter 55 because of 2 connections. The first is to the word mayim in verse 1. Hoi, all who are thirsty, let them come for water. And the second is the reference to Brit Olam in verse 3. The translation is to the everlasting covenant promised to David, but could also be read as the covenant with the entire world, the Brit Noah, kind of a double entendre.
Rick, I think that the water reference is weak, since here it's referring to water to quench thirst and not waters of the flood. But I really do like your idea about Brit Olam. I think that the sages wanted to reinforce the positive message at the end of chapter 54. As Alter puts it, these verses use water, food, milk, and wine is metaphors to suggest God's beneficence to his people and that it's given freely. It reinforces what I was saying about the covenant, Brit Olam. Well, we have an obligation to uphold our end of the bargain, but even if we fail, God will uphold his end and all will be good.
That's good enough for me. Shall I beneficently chant the final verses?
Please do.
Hoi kol tzameh lechu lamayim v'asher ein lo kasef lechu shivru ve'echolu ulechu shivru belo chesef uvelo mechir yayin v'chalav lama tishkelu chesef below lechem vigiachem below lesovah shimu shamoa elai v'ichlu tov v'titanag badeshen nafshechem hatu oznechem ulchu elai shimu utchi nafshechem Ve'echrata lachem brit olam chazdei David hane'emanim hein ed leumim netativ nagid umtzave leumim hein goy lo teda tikra vegoy lo yeda'ucha Elecha yarutzu lema'an Adonai Elohecha velikdosh Yisrael kifei arach.
Just great, Rick. As always, thanks to Norm Gar for all the beautiful graphics, music, text, and editing.
Norm just keeps on finding great graphics and music.
He does. Don't forget to write us with your thoughts and comments. Our emails are below, and if you like our Zoomcast, please forward the link to your friends and family. Next week, we'll have another new episode for Lech Lecha. That will be the last new episode for a while, since we've covered almost all the non-holiday Haftarot. We'll have more to say about that next week. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
And stay dry.